The year is 1942. The world is at war. In Europe, armies are clashing in the mud of France and the snow of Russia. But in New York City, a different kind of war is brewing. It is a silent war, fought in the shadows of the docks and the back rooms of speakeasies. It is a war over territory, over pride, and over the invisible lines that divide the city by color and creed. To the north lies Harlem, the kingdom of Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. It is a fortress of culture and commerce, a place where Bumpy rules with a velvet glove over an iron fist. He is the professor, the chess player, the man who brings order to chaos. To the west, along the Hudson River, lies Hell's Kitchen. This is the domain of the Irish mob. If Harlem was a kingdom, Hell's Kitchen was a slaughterhouse. The Irish gangsters who ran the docks didn't quote Shakespeare. They didn't play chess. They played with butcher knives and ice picks. They were men like the Westies, though that name would come later. The bloodline was already there. They were known for a brutality that shocked even the Italian mafia. They were unpredictable. They were violent. And worst of all, they were arrogant. They looked at Bumpy Johnson, and they didn't see a boss. They saw a target. They saw a numbers runner in a fancy suit who needed to be taught a lesson. They believed that because they were white, and because they controlled the police on the west side, they were untouchable. They were about to make the last mistake of their careers. The conflict began on a Tuesday. A shipment of high-grade Canadian whiskey, intended for the jazz clubs of Lenox Avenue, vanished. It wasn't just a few crates. It was a whole truck. The driver, a young boy from Harlem named Silas, came back to Bumpy's office with a broken nose and a message. He said the truck had been hijacked on 10th Avenue. He said the men who took it were Irish, and he said they told him to tell Bumpy that if he wanted his whiskey back, he would have to come and beg for it. Bumpy sat at his desk, cleaning his fingernails with a small knife. He listened to the boy. He didn't shout. He didn't flip the table. He simply asked one question. Who was the leader? A guy named O'Shea, Silas stuttered. Big guy, red hair. They call him the Butcher. Bumpy nodded. He knew the name. Liam the Butcher O'Shea. A mid-level boss in Hell's Kitchen with a reputation for sadism. A man who enjoyed pain. A man who thought he was climbing the ladder by picking a fight with the King of Harlem. Most men would have sent an army. Most men would have loaded up 3 cars with soldiers and turned 10th Avenue into a shooting gallery. But Bumpy Johnson knew that a shooting war with the Irish brought too much heat. The police would side with the white gangsters. The newspapers would scream about a Harlem invasion. Number Bumpy decided to handle this the diplomatic way, or so it seemed. He sent a message back. He agreed to a meeting. He agreed to come to O'Shea's turf to discuss a transfer fee for the stolen goods. It was a sign of weakness. It was a capitulation. At least, that is what O'Shea thought. 2 nights later, Bumpy Johnson stepped into his black Lincoln Zephyr. He didn't take an army. He took only one man, his right hand, Junie Bird. Junie was a small man, but he was widely considered the most dangerous human being in New York City. He was a silent shadow who carried a sawed-off shotgun under his coat like it was a Bible. "You sure about this, Bumpy?" Junie asked as they crossed the border of 110th Street. "Going into the kitchen with just the 2 of us? It smells like a trap." Bumpy lit a cigarette, the flame illuminating his sharp, calm features. "It is a trap, Junie," Bumpy said softly. "But a trap only works if the mouse doesn't know where the cheese is. We aren't the mouse tonight. They drove down the West Side Highway, the river black and cold to their right. The air changed as they entered Hell's Kitchen. It smelled of brine, rotting fish, and unwashed bodies. The tenements leaned over the street like broken teeth. This was not the vibrant, swinging Harlem. This was a place of desperation. They pulled up to a warehouse on 44th Street. It was a grim, brick building with blackened windows. Outside, 3 men in flat caps stood smoking cigarettes. They watched the Lincoln pull up with hungry eyes. They looked like wolves watching a lost sheep. Bumpy stepped out of the car. He was wearing a beige trench coat and a fedora. He looked immaculate. He looked rich. In Hell's Kitchen, looking rich was usually a death sentence. The men at the door didn't step aside. Bumpy had to walk right up to them. "I'm here for O'Shea," Bumpy said. His voice was level, devoid of fear. One of the men spat on the ground, inches from Bumpy's polished shoe. He grinned, revealing a mouth full of gold and rot. "He's in the back," the man grunted. "Don't keep him waiting, boy." Bumpy didn't look at the spit. He stepped over it. He walked into the darkness of the warehouse, Junie Bird following a step behind, his hands deep in his pockets, his eyes scanning every shadow, every rafter, every corner. The warehouse was cavernous. It smelled of sawdust and stale beer. In the center of the room, under a single hanging light bulb that swung gently in the draft, sat a table. Around the table sat 5 men, and in the middle sat Liam, the butcher, O'Shea. He was a mountain of a man. His face was a map of scars, flushed red from years of whiskey and violence. He was eating a steak with his hands, grease shining on his chin. On the table next to him sat a crate of Bumpy's stolen whiskey. When Bumpy approached the circle of light, the conversation stopped. The Irishmen looked at him. They didn't look with respect. They looked with amusement. To them, this was entertainment. They had the King of Harlem alone, on their turf, surrounded. "Well, well," O'Shea boomed, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "Look who decided to come down from the castle, the Emperor Jones himself." The men laughed. It was a cruel, jagged sound. Bumpy stopped at the edge of the light. He didn't sit down. There was no chair offered. "I've come for my property, Mr. O'Shea," Bumpy said, "and I'm willing to pay a finder's fee to avoid any unpleasantness." O'Shea wiped his mouth with his sleeve. He stood up slowly. He was a head taller than Bumpy, broad as a doorway. He walked around the table, circling Bumpy like a shark. "Property?" O'Shea asked mockingly. "I don't see your name on it. I see a crate of Canadian gold that fell off a truck. Finders keepers. Isn't that the law of the land?" He stopped in front of Bumpy. He leaned in close. His breath smelled of onions and cheap gin. "You know, Bumpy," O'Shea whispered, "I expected you to be taller. I heard stories. They say you're a giant. But up close, you look small. You look fragile." Bumpy didn't blink. He stared into O'Shea's bloodshot eyes. "Size is a deception, Mr. O'Shea. Gunpowder is small, but it moves mountains." O'Shea laughed. He turned back to his men. "Did you hear that? The darky is a philosopher. Gunpowder. I love it." He walked back to the table. He reached into a paper bag that was sitting next to his steak. He pulled something out. It was a banana. The room went dead silent. The insult was clear. It was visceral. It was a gesture that dated back to the ugliest stereotypes of America. It was a way of saying, "You are not a man. You are an animal." O'Shea held the banana up. He peeled it slowly, his eyes locked on Bumpy. He took a bite, chewing with his mouth open, making exaggerated animal noises. "You know," O'Shea said, his mouth full. "My grandfather used to tell me stories about the jungle. He said that if you want to make friends with the natives, you have to bring them a treat." He tossed the half-eaten banana onto the floor at Bumpy's feet. It landed with a wet slap. "Go on," O'Shea sneered. "Have a snack. You came all this way. I wouldn't want you to leave hungry." The other Irish gangsters tensed. They had their hands inside their jackets. They were waiting for Bumpy to react. They were waiting for him to lunge, to shout, to reach for a gun. They wanted him to confirm their prejudice. They wanted an excuse to kill him. Junie Bird, standing in the shadows, shifted his weight. His finger tightened on the trigger of the shotgun under his coat. He was ready to die. He was ready to take all of them with him. But Bumpy didn't move. He looked at the banana on the dirty concrete floor. Then he looked at O'Shea. The silence stretched for 10 seconds, 20 seconds. It became heavy, suffocating. The air in the warehouse seemed to drop 10 degrees. Bumpy's face was a mask of stone. He didn't look angry. He didn't look humiliated. He looked disappointed. He looked like a schoolteacher who had just watched a student fail a simple test. He reached into his pocket. The Irishman flinched, hands darting to their guns. But Bumpy didn't pull out a gun. He pulled out a handkerchief, a white silk handkerchief. He dabbed his forehead lightly. "Is that it?" Bumpy asked. His voice was barely a whisper, but it carried to every corner of the room. O'Shea stopped chewing. "What? Is that the best you have?" Bumpy continued, his voice rising in strength. "I came here to discuss business. I came here to offer you a way to survive the winter. And you offer me fruit?" Bumpy shook his head slowly. He took a step forward, stepping directly onto the banana, crushing it into the floor. He didn't look down. He kept his eyes fixed on O'Shea. "You mistake my patience for weakness, Liam," Bumpy said. "You think because I wear a suit, I have forgotten the street. You think because I talk softly, I cannot scream." O'Shea's face turned purple. "You listen to me, boy." "No," Bumpy interrupted. The word cracked like a whip. "You listen to me." Bumpy walked around the table. He walked right past the gunman. He walked until he was standing next to the crate of whiskey. He rested his hand on the wood. "You think you trapped me," Bumpy said. "You think you lured me into your den. You have 5 men. You have guns. You have the home field advantage." Bumpy picked up a bottle of the whiskey. He looked at the label. "But you forgot one thing, Liam. You forgot to check the manifest." O'Shea looked confused. "What manifest? It's whiskey." "It was whiskey when it left Canada," Bumpy said. "But when it got to my warehouse in Harlem before you stole it, we made a few modifications." Bumpy held the bottle up to the light. The liquid inside was a rich, dark amber. "You see," Bumpy said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly conversational tone. "I knew you were going to hit that truck. My spies told me a week ago. So we switched the load. This isn't Canadian Club. This is a special blend. We call it the Goodbye Kiss." O'Shea stared at the bottle. He looked at the steak he had just eaten. He looked at the glass of whiskey he had just drained. "What are you talking about?" O'Shea stammered, a flicker of doubt entering his eyes. "I'm talking about chemistry," Bumpy said. "I'm talking about arsenic, tasteless, odorless, and very, very slow acting. Bumpy set the bottle down gently. You and your men have been drinking this for an hour, haven't you? Celebrating your victory? Toasting to the dumb darky you robbed? The room went into a state of suspended animation. The Irishmen looked at their glasses. One of them dropped his glass, the sound of shattering glass echoing like a gunshot. O'Shea clutched his stomach. It was psychosomatic, surely. But the fear was real. The sweat on his forehead suddenly felt cold. "You're lying," O'Shea whispered. "You wouldn't poison a whole truck. It's worth thousands." Bumpy smiled, and this time it was the smile of the devil himself. "What is money to a dead man, Liam?" Bumpy asked. "I would burn $1 million to teach a dog not to bite me." Bumpy checked his watch. "If I were you," Bumpy said, buttoning his coat, "I wouldn't be worrying about bananas. I would be worrying about an antidote. And the only man in New York who has it is standing right in front of you." O'Shea looked at his men. They were panicking. They were clutching their throats, their eyes wide with terror. The power dynamic in the room had flipped in the span of 30 seconds. The hunters had become the prey. "Give it to us," O'Shea roared, pulling his gun. "Give us the antidote or I'll blow your head off." Bumpy didn't flinch. He looked at the barrel of the gun. "Shoot me," Bumpy said softly, "and you die in agony within the hour. Your insides will melt. You will bleed from your eyes. It is a bad way to go, Liam." Bumpy turned his back on the gun. He began to walk toward the exit. "Or," Bumpy said, stopping at the edge of the darkness, "you can run. There is a hospital on 8th Avenue. If you run fast enough, maybe they can pump your stomachs in time. Maybe." Bumpy looked back over his shoulder. "But if you want to live, you have to run now. Right now." He snapped his fingers. The sound of Bumpy Johnson snapping his fingers was like a starter pistol at a racetrack. For a fraction of a second, the Irish gangsters froze, their brains trying to process the impossible choice before them. They looked at the guns in their hands, heavy, cold steel that could end a life in an instant. Then they looked at their leader, Liam, the butcher, O'Shea. They saw the blood drain from his face. They saw the sweat beading on his forehead. They saw the man who had bragged about cutting people open now clutching his own stomach in phantom agony. Panic is a contagion. It spreads faster than any virus, faster than any poison. When O'Shea dropped his gun, the spell was broken. The gun hit the concrete floor with a metallic clatter that echoed through the cavernous warehouse. That sound was the signal of total surrender. O'Shea didn't say a word. He didn't issue an order. He simply turned and ran. The man who was a mountain of muscle, the terror of the West Side docks, sprinted for the door with the desperation of a frightened child. His men followed instantly. They tripped over chairs. They scrambled over crates. One of them, a young enforcer named Mickey, actually vomited as he ran, his mind convincing his body that the arsenic was already working. They burst through the metal doors of the warehouse, their footsteps thundering on the pavement outside as they piled into their cars or simply ran down 44th Street, screaming for a doctor. Inside the warehouse, silence returned. The single light bulb continued to swing gently, casting long, dancing shadows against the brick walls. The gun O'Shea had dropped lay on the floor, useless. The banana peel, the symbol of their disrespect, lay flattened and brown where Bumpy had stepped on it. Bumpy Johnson stood perfectly still. He hadn't moved a muscle since he snapped his fingers. He listened to the fading sound of the Irishman's retreat. He listened until the roar of their engines disappeared into the night, heading toward the hospital on 8th Avenue. Only then did he exhale. Junie Bird stepped out of the shadows. His shotgun was still under his coat, his hand still on the trigger. He looked at the door. He looked at Bumpy. His eyes were wide with a mixture of confusion and terror. "Bumpy," Junie whispered, his voice tight. "We gotta go. If they die, if 5 white men die of poison tonight, the police are gonna burn Harlem to the ground. They'll bring the National Guard. We can't be here when the bodies start dropping." Bumpy didn't answer immediately. He walked over to the table where O'Shea had been sitting. He looked at the half-eaten steak. He looked at the bottle of whiskey he had placed on the table, the bottle labeled "The Goodbye Kiss" in his story. "Relax, Junie," Bumpy said softly. "Nobody is going to die." Junie shook his head. "You said it was arsenic. You said it melts your insides. Bumpy, that's murder 1. 5 counts." Bumpy picked up the bottle. He uncorked it. The smell of rich oak-aged whiskey filled the air. He didn't pour it out. He didn't smash it. Instead, he lifted the bottle to his lips. Junie lunged forward. "Bumpy, don't! Are you crazy?" Bumpy ignored him. He took a long, slow swallow. He let the liquid burn down his throat. He closed his eyes, savoring the taste. He lowered the bottle and let out a satisfied sigh. "It's good stuff," Bumpy said, wiping his mouth with the silk handkerchief. "A little smoky. Notes of vanilla. But definitely no arsenic." Junie froze. He stared at Bumpy. He stared at the bottle. The realization hit him like a physical blow. "You lied?" Junie asked, his voice rising in disbelief. "You bluffed them? You bluffed 5 armed men with a story?" Bumpy smiled. It was a genuine smile this time, mischievous and sharp. "I didn't lie, Junie. I told them a story. People love stories. They believe in stories more than they believe in the truth. O'Shea wanted to believe I was a savage who would poison a truck. He wanted to believe I was dangerous. I just gave him the monster he was looking for." Junie started to laugh. It was a nervous, hysterical laugh that bubbled up from his chest. "You crazy son of a bitch. You made them run to the hospital for a stomach pump. For nothing." "Not for nothing," Bumpy corrected. "For disrespect." Bumpy walked over to the warehouse phone on the wall. He dialed a number. It was the number of the trucking depot on 135th Street. "Send the trucks," Bumpy said into the receiver. "Bring the boys. We have a pickup to make. And bring an extra truck. We're taking O'Shea's inventory too. Call it a storage fee." For the next hour, Bumpy and Junie supervised as a crew of Harlem's best movers stripped the warehouse bare. They took back the stolen whiskey. They took O'Shea's stash of cigarettes. They took the furniture. They even took the light bulbs. By the time they were finished, the warehouse was a hollow shell, empty of everything except the banana peel on the floor. Bumpy left it there. A calling card. A reminder of the night the Irish mob slipped up. While Bumpy was overseeing the loadout, a very different scene was playing out at St. Clair's Hospital on the west side. The emergency room was in chaos. Liam O'Shea and his 4 men had burst in, screaming that they had been poisoned. They were hysterical. They were sweating, shaking, convinced that their internal organs were liquefying. The doctors and nurses, used to dealing with dock workers and drunks, had never seen anything like it. 5 grown men, known killers, weeping and begging for salvation. The doctors didn't ask questions. They went to work. If you know anything about medical procedures in the 1940s, you know that having your stomach pumped was not a gentle experience. It was brutal. It involved thick rubber tubes, gallons of water, and violent, uncontrollable retching. It was a humiliating, painful, and messy process. For 2 hours, O'Shea and his men endured this torture. They lay on gurneys, gagging, their bodies convulsing as the doctors purged them of the poison. They prayed to God. They promised to change their ways. They confessed their sins to confused nurses. And then, the test results came back. The head doctor walked into the recovery ward. He looked at the chart. He looked at O'Shea, who was pale, exhausted, and lying in a pool of his own sweat. "Mr. O'Shea," the doctor said, looking confused, "we've analyzed the contents of your stomach. We found steak. We found potatoes. We found a significant amount of alcohol. But we didn't find any arsenic. We didn't find any poison at all." O'Shea blinked. His throat was raw. His stomach muscles ached. "What?" "You're fine," the doctor said. "You're drunk, but you're fine. There was never any poison." The silence in the hospital room was heavy. O'Shea looked at his men. They looked back at him. Slowly, painfully, the truth began to sink in. The realization was worse than the arsenic would have been. There was no poison. There was no goodbye kiss. Bumpy Johnson had walked into their fortress, armed with nothing but a handkerchief and a lie. And he had made them do this to themselves. He had made them panic. He had made them run. He had made them beg. O'Shea closed his eyes. He knew in that moment that his career was over. You can survive a gunshot wound. You can survive a prison sentence. But in the underworld, you cannot survive laughter. And when this story got out, and Bumpy would make sure it got out, the entire city would be laughing. By the time O'Shea dragged himself out of the hospital at dawn, the story was already circulating in the jazz clubs of Harlem. By noon, it was being whispered in the Italian social clubs in Brooklyn. By dinner, even the beat cops were telling it. "Did you hear about O'Shea? Did you hear about the banana?" The story became a legend. It grew with every telling. In some versions, Bumpy hypnotized them. In some versions, he made them drink the whiskey at gunpoint. But the core of the truth remained. The King of Harlem had defeated the butchers of Hell's Kitchen without firing a single shot. O'Shea tried to return to the streets, but the damage was done. His men lost respect for him. His rivals saw him as weak. A month later, he was pushed out of his territory by a younger, smarter Irish boss who knew better than to pick a fight with Bumpy Johnson. O'Shea faded into obscurity, a punchline in a history book of tough guys. Bumpy Johnson, on the other hand, only grew stronger. The incident cemented his reputation not just as a gangster, but as a mastermind. It proved that he was playing a different game than everyone else. While other bosses relied on brute force, Bumpy relied on psychology. He understood that fear was a weapon that could be turned against the holder. He understood that the greatest weakness of a bully is his own imagination. A week after the incident, a package arrived at Bumpy's office on 125th Street. It was from the new boss of Hell's Kitchen. Bumpy opened it carefully, Junie standing by with his hand on his gun, expecting a bomb. Inside the box was a single bottle of expensive Irish whiskey and a note. The note was short. It didn't contain an apology. It didn't contain a threat. It just said, "To the professor, stay on your side, and we'll stay on ours." Bumpy smiled. He uncorked the bottle and poured 2 glasses. He handed one to Junie. "To education," Bumpy said. "To education," Junie replied. clinking his glass against Bumpy's. Bumpy took a sip. He walked to the window and looked out over Harlem. He saw the people walking on the avenue. He saw the lights of the Apollo Theater. He saw his kingdom. He knew that there would be other challenges. He knew that the Italians, the police, and the government would keep coming. But he also knew that he had something they didn't. He had the ability to look a man in the eye and show him his own nightmares. The banana incident serves as a masterclass in the Bumpy Johnson philosophy. He didn't react to the insult with anger, because anger makes you predictable. He didn't react with immediate violence, because violence brings consequences. He reacted with intellect. He took the very symbol of their racism, the banana, and he used it to peel back their tough exterior and reveal the cowards underneath. He proved that you don't need a machine gun to destroy a man. Sometimes, all you need is a bottle of whiskey, a steady voice, and the absolute certainty that you are the smartest man in the room. The Irish mob never came back to 125th Street. They learned their lesson. And the lesson was simple. You can fight the devil if you have to. But you do not mess with Bumpy Johnson. Because while the devil might take your soul, Bumpy Johnson will make you give it up willingly, and you'll say thank you while you do it.
Thanks for listening, folks. If you liked that video and want more, be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss any Bumpy Johnson stories.